Let me tell you something that was never meant to be spoken aloud. In 1899, in a forgotten corner of America, a boy was born, and his birth was a crime against nature itself. The townspeople whispered, but no one dared say it outright. His mother was also his sister, his father, her own brother. Think about that. A child born from the collapse of bloodlines, a knot tied so tightly it strangled itself. Doctors wouldn't write it down. Priests looked the other way. Neighbors pretended they didn't notice. But the truth spread in low voices across fences, in church pews, at the edge of fields. The boy shouldn't exist. And yet, he did. They said his eyes were wrong, too sharp, too knowing, like he had seen something no child should see. They said he didn't play, didn't laugh, didn't grow the way other children grew. He just lingered, always watching, always silent, like a reminder of the sin no one dared name. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a family consumed by something darker. Power turned inward, corruption fed from its own veins. And the boy, he was the proof. Proof that the strongest chains are forged not of iron, but of silence. Now listen carefully, because once you step deeper into this story, it doesn't let you out. You'll see why this case was buried, why no records survived, and why the boy's name was erased. And you'll understand what happens when the line between blood and power collapses. Because this isn't just a story about 1899, it's about what people are still capable of hiding today. The boy's first breath was a scandal the town could never admit. Imagine it, a newborn wailing in a farmhouse bedroom where the curtains were always drawn. His sister, mother, pale with exhaustion, his brother, father, standing in the corner, silent, his hands shaking, but his jaw clenched like stone. No midwife, no doctor, only the family, determined to keep their sin sealed inside 4 walls. The truth is, the authorities did know. A traveling physician, summoned too late, saw the boy. He knew instantly what had happened. The way the infant's body twisted, the strange slackness in his features. It was a signature of incest written into flesh. He tried to report it, but the sheriff shut the door in his face. Why? Because the family wasn't just a family. They were landowners, church donors. Their blood may have been tainted, but their money kept them clean. The boy grew into rumor more than flesh. He wasn't allowed in school, he wasn't baptized. He was kept hidden, like a secret the family couldn't bury, but dared not expose. The neighbors saw glimpses, a pale face at a window, watching. Sometimes at dusk, he would stand barefoot in the fields, not moving, just staring at the tree line. They said it felt like he was waiting for something, or someone. And here's the most shocking fact. He had no name. Not in church records, not in the census, not even on a gravestone later. The family called him Boy, nothing more. Stripped of identity, stripped of future. He was never meant to be a man, he was only meant to be forgotten. But history has a way of remembering what people try to erase. Old court filings, hidden in county archives, mention an unfit child, conceived in unnatural relation. Doctors in whispered letters described a case they could never publish. And neighbors, decades later, told their grandchildren about the boy who wasn't supposed to exist, about his eyes, his silence, and the strange feeling that lingered when he was near. This is where the story shifts from tragedy to something far darker, because keeping him hidden wasn't enough. He became an experiment, living proof of a forbidden truth, and once people in power realized what he was, they wanted to see how far his existence could be stretched. Now ask yourself, what would you do if the strongest in your community, your own family, your own church, your own lawman, decided to sacrifice you for their silence? By the time the boy turned 6, his existence was no longer just a family shame. It was a weapon. The family realized they could not hide him forever. Too many neighbors had seen. Too many whispers had spread. So they changed strategy. They locked him away, not to erase him, but to control him. He lived in the attic, a space barely tall enough for a grown man to stand. The windows were nailed shut, the door bolted from the outside. He wasn't given books, toys, or lessons, only scraps of food and silence. And here's the shocking truth. He wasn't raised like a child at all. He was raised like an experiment. The family wanted to know, would he survive? Would he grow? Would something inside him twist even further? They treated him as living proof of their own corruption. Every cough, every strange mannerism, every failure to thrive was recorded by his uncle father in a notebook, the kind you might expect a doctor to use, not a farmer. Pages of observations, measurements, dates, notes like, does not speak, watches constantly, fearless of dark. Neighbors later testified that strange noises came from the house at night. Low moans, the sound of furniture being dragged. Once a farmer passing by claimed he heard the boy singing in a voice far too deep for his age, like an old man trapped in a child's throat. The boy's silence only made him more terrifying. When the local priest was finally forced to visit, he wrote in his private diary something chilling. The boy does not blink like others. He stares too long. I do not believe he is entirely of this world. That diary page was found, years later, hidden in church archives and quietly destroyed before it could be made public. And here's what shocks me most. Outsiders came. Men in long coats claiming to be doctors from the city. They were welcomed by the family at night when no one was supposed to notice. But neighbors not. Iced lanterns moving in the windows until dawn. And afterward, the boy was seen less and less, as though each visit stripped something from him. He was no longer just a child born of corruption. He had become property, a specimen, proof of what happens when power, silence, and bloodline fuse into one. And if you think this horror ends with him, you're wrong. The deeper we go, the more you'll see that this was never about one boy. It was about control, about how far institutions will go to bury truth when it threatens the order they depend on. By the time he was 10, the boy had become a ghost in his own home. He was no longer called a child, never a name, but the experiment. No one in town knew what had been done to him, and his family made certain it stayed that way, but there were signs the boy was no longer fully human. He stopped sleeping. Not because of nightmares, he didn't dream, but because he seemed to exist in a constant state of wakefulness, as though the world had become an endless corridor he could not escape. His eyes, those deep, unsettling eyes, began to reflect a strange pattern. Pupils too dilated, irises too sharp, as if absorbing more than light. People whispered that when he looked at you, you felt your own thoughts crumble. By this time, outsiders had returned, this time not as curious doctors, but as something else. Men in plain suits, carrying leather cases filled with papers, who spent hours in the farmhouse attic with the boy. No records of who they were exist today, but their presence was noted in police logs later marked classified. Those logs disappeared decades ago. But the whispers remain, that the boy was not just observed, he was tested, that the family was paid for something they could not name. Here is the part most people will not tell you. The boy's body began to change, not in the way of a normal child growing. This was deeper. His skin became pale, almost translucent. His strength grew unnaturally. His voice, when he finally spoke, was not a child's voice. It carried weight, an authority that unsettled adults. And yet when questioned, he would not answer. He only stared. The family's behavior changed, too. The farmhouse became fortified. Neighbors reported strange rituals at night. Bells, chanting, figures in cloaks. When anyone asked the boy's uncle-father what it meant, he simply said, "It is protection. For him." and for us. But protection from what? From who? The answer lies in what happened next. The boy disappeared from the attic, not through the door, not through the window, simply gone. And yet, years later, people swore they saw him, walking alone in the forest, at the edge of the town, watching. If you think this is just an isolated case of family madness, you are wrong. This is the footprint of something far older, far more dangerous. And when we reach the next part of this story, you will understand why they buried him, erased him, and ensured no record remained. Because what they feared was not exposure. It was what he knew. Here's the truth few will admit. The boy was never simply a child. He was a symbol, a living testament to what happens when blood, secrecy, and power intersect. And by the time he vanished, the people who orchestrated his life, his own family, knew they had created something that could not remain hidden forever. The disappearance was deliberate. They didn't lose him. They erased him. Records were destroyed. His name was stripped away. Even the memory of him was scrubbed from the town's history. But the boy left a mark, something they could not bury. Decades later, fragments of his story surfaced. A letter from a man who claimed to have been in that attic studying the boy. A police report describing strange disappearances linked to the same family. Testimonies from aged townsfolk of a pale figure walking the forest at night. And most chilling of all, a journal entry from the boy's uncle-father. He will return. They will call him other names. But the blood speaks. What does that mean? That phrase, "the blood speaks," is the key. It suggests this was never about a single child, but about something far older. An agenda. A system of power hidden in plain sight. Institutions, churches, and secret societies have, for centuries, sought to control bloodlines, because blood carries more than life. It carries inheritance, power, knowledge, secrets that can be weaponized. And this boy, born of corruption and silence, was proof of it. They used him as an experiment. They tested the limits of human nature, of identity. They created him to prove that they could control the unthinkable. And when they succeeded, they buried him. Not to hide him, but to use him as a lesson, a warning, a ritual. What they did not know is that some truths cannot be erased. The boy's story survived in whispers, in rituals, in bloodlines, and in certain circles, even now, there are those who say his life as not the first, and it will not be the last. Halfway through this story, here's what I want you to do. Write in the comments, "Blood speaks," twice. Not because it changes anything for me, but because it changes something in you. It locks in your awareness. It declares that you've stepped past the veil and entered the hidden truth. Because once you see this, you can never unsee it. Here's what they never told you. The boy was not just a family secret. He was part of something much larger, something older than that farmhouse, older than that town, older even than the year 1899. His existence was an experiment embedded in a network of hidden agendas, psychological control, and ancient corruption that stretches far beyond one life. By the early 1900s, rumors began to surface of other cases, children born under unnatural circumstances, children whose existence was carefully erased. And in the margins of historical records, hidden in coded language, there were mentions of a group that scholars later called the custodians. No official proof exists, no photographs, only fragments, references in letters, footnotes in forgotten books, and strange symbols scratched into old walls, symbols that match markings found in that farmhouse attic. The boy's life was their blueprint. They studied him, not as a child, but as a living key to something forbidden, how to manipulate identity, heredity, and human will. And there is something terrifying about that, because it means this was never an isolated case. It means that what happened to him was deliberate, that it was part of a systematic effort to control life itself. There is a reason his story was erased. Institutions, churches, governments, even medical societies have learned how dangerous certain knowledge can be. To admit his existence would be to admit that bloodlines can be manipulated, that identity can be engineered, that power can be inherited in ways science refuses to explain. That knowledge is dangerous because it changes everything. And here is the deeper truth. This was not only about science, it was about control. The family knew it, and so did the custodians. The boy's life became a case study in obedience and silence. He was locked away, studied, stripped of a name, stripped of a future, because they wanted to prove one thing: control is stronger than nature. The moment you understand that, the world you think you know begins to unravel. You begin to see that history is not a straight line. It is a labyrinth of manipulation, with corridors hidden in plain sight. And the boy's story is one of the most disturbing passages in that labyrinth. If you have understood this so far, write "Blood Speaks" twice in the comments now. This is not just ritual, it is your anchor to the truth you have chosen to confront. The boy's fate was sealed long before anyone knew the truth of what he represented. By his 14th year, he had ceased to be a child. He had become a subject, a ghost, a warning. And what they did to him then is something almost no record survives to speak of. Inside that attic, beneath layers of dust and silence, the family continued their experiment. Outsiders came less openly, but more frequently, always under cover of darkness. Men who claimed to be doctors, scientists, even men of faith. They examined him, tested him, spoke of blood resonance and psychic inheritance in tones too deliberate to be coincidence. And they took notes, thousands of pages of them, hidden away in coded archives that have since been burned or lost. What they discovered terrified them. The boy, born of a singular corruption, did not obey ordinary human rules. His body endured trauma that should have broken him. His mind resisted control, and his awareness, it grew in ways they could not explain. He began to speak rarely, and when he did, it was not in the words of a child. He spoke in fragments of prophecy, fragments of names, places, and events that would not come to pass for decades. The family panicked. They feared he had become something they could no longer command, and so they made the decision to disappear him. Not kill him, not abandon him, but to erase him completely. They dismantled his life, burned records, sealed the attic, and when neighbors asked, they said simply, "The boy was taken by God." But those who knew more whispered something else, that he had been given over to forces beyond their control, that the boy was taken not to die, but to be hidden, to become part of something much larger, an underground system of knowledge, a network of influence stretching beyond nations. The custodians, the bloodline keepers, they had decided his existence could not remain in any public ledger, and so they removed him as quietly as he had been born. And here's the thing, his story didn't vanish with him. It became myth, a symbol whispered among those who understood the truth, that there are lives created for control, that there are experiments designed to shape history, and that the most dangerous knowledge is the knowledge of blood. Because when they remove a name, when they erase a record, they are not hiding a crime, they are hiding a power. And the question now is, what did they learn from him? What they learned from the boy, what they took from him, has never been written in any official record. But the fragments that survive paint a terrifying picture, because his life was not a mistake. It was a blueprint, a proof of concept, a demonstration that control over human identity can be forged through blood. Those who studied him, the custodians, dispersed. They carried his story into secret chambers of power, in churches, in universities, in government agencies. They locked the knowledge in archives that no ordinary person can reach, but they did not destroy it. Because what they had discovered was too valuable, they began to replicate it, not openly, not in laboratories with test tubes, but quietly, through manipulation of bloodlines, influence, and lineage. And it still happens today. The boy's life became a silent echo, a lesson whispered through centuries. Power does not come from strength. Power comes from control, control of knowledge, control of heritage, control of the very narrative of life itself. And blood is the currency of that control. If you think that sounds like fiction, look at history. Look at the families who rule behind crowns and corporations. Look at the secrecy of certain institutions. Look at how certain truths are buried with deliberate force, and then understand this. The boy was not the anomaly. He was the prototype, a warning etched into flesh and memory. Here's the part they hoped no one would discover. The boy never truly vanished. Witnesses decades later described a figure, pale, silent, watching, from the edges of forests, from abandoned farmhouses. Some say he lives still, under a different name, in a different place, as part of something far greater than himself. Others say he is the key to a knowledge so dangerous it could unravel power itself if ever spoken aloud. And that is why they buried his existence. That is why every Wapipan record was erased, because once the truth spreads, control is lost. By now, if you've been following closely, you should understand this is not just a story from 1899. It is a warning, a blueprint hidden in plain sight, and the question is, are you prepared to face what it means for you? If you have followed this far, comment now. Blood speaks. Twice. You are not simply watching. You are choosing to step into knowledge most are too afraid to face. What happened to the boy after he vanished is one of the most closely guarded secrets in modern history. There is no single record, no public trail, only fragments, rumors preserved in cryptic documents, oral testimonies, and the kind of half-truths meant to keep a nightmare alive without ever naming it. Some claim he was taken deep into a hidden network of power, an underground society that studies and controls bloodlines. Others say he was kept alive in isolation for decades, a living archive of the experiment his life became. But the most chilling claim of all is this, that he never truly grew old, that his body was altered so profoundly that he became something other, a living symbol of the corruption he was born from. There are those who believe he still exists today, not as a man, not as a boy, but as something beyond human. A guardian, a warning, a proof that there are things in this world too dangerous to speak aloud, that some truths are buried so deeply that even the strongest institutions fear their emergence. Here's the darkest fact. If he was taken, it was not to protect him. It was to control him, because the knowledge he carried, whether he knew it or not, was a kind of power, and power, when it exists, is always claimed, always contained, always weaponized. The family? They died quietly, but their legacy lived on, woven into the fabric of certain institutions that never speak of him. The custodians, whoever they are, continue their work, not in laboratories, but in the hidden corridors of influence, where bloodlines are curated, identities are shaped, and power is preserved. And the boy's story? It became a cautionary myth, a hidden truth for those who know where to look, for those who know that history is not written by the innocent. It is written by the ones who control what the innocent can see. Now this is the moment of reckoning, because he is not finished. His story is still alive, in shadows, in whispers, in the corridors of power you cannot enter. And if you are listening closely, You may realize, this is not just a story of the past, this is a story of now. Here's the truth no history book will ever print. The boy who should never have existed was never merely a child of corruption. He was a warning, a proof, a signal to those who understand the hidden architecture of power. His life was a deliberate act, a test of what happens when blood is weaponized and silence is enforced. What happened to him after 1899 is no longer speculation. It is part of a quiet history that moves in the shadows, where names are erased, records are burned, and truths are locked away. The custodians, whoever they truly are, did not kill him. They transformed him. They took him into something larger than the world you know, something older than time. That boy is not just a forgotten victim. He is a reminder that control does not end with death. It evolves. It hides in plain sight, wrapped in secrecy, carried in bloodlines, and guarded by institutions built to bury truth. And the most dangerous part of this story? It is still happening, right now. Somewhere, another child is born under circumstances hidden by silence. Another life is shaped, not by chance, but by design. If you have followed this story to the end, understand this. You have crossed a line. You are no longer a bystander. You are now part of the truth they want buried. And that truth is simple. Power is not given, it is taken. It is preserved in secrecy. It is inherited in blood. So I ask you again, look closely at the world around you. Question the silence. Question the history. And remember this name, even if it no longer exists in any record. Because the boy who should never have existed is not gone. He is waiting, watching, and his legacy will not be erased. This is the knowledge they fear, and now, so should you.